Anyway, so tonight I'll hand it over to Sid. Sid, we're super excited to have you here. We've all talked a lot about RAG, how RAG puts your company's data first in the kind of visual thing, and then you've got large language models on it. And Sid's going to talk about that and other opportunities that you may not need this vector database. So Sid, take it over, introduce yourself, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you very much for inviting me, Paul. Really appreciate it. Hey, everybody. It's great to be here and see all so much interest in GAI. My background, I've been working in search and natural language processing for quite a while. I was at Fast Search and Transfer, better known as Microsoft now. And I also founded a company called Ativio, which is better known as ServiceNow. Ultimately, I actually started my career at John Hancock Financial Services, and it was an incredible company, a great place to work, had some really huge mainframes, but it did have a very severe case of the silo problem. And of course, it was ultimately absorbed by some faster companies, right? Manulife in Canada was a more efficient and nimble company, and they used technology better. It was a funny thing to see that silos can really be a huge barrier, and it's a pattern that I kind of ended up following. The other thing I learned there is, while we tolerate drag and drop reporting and business intelligence, we just want the answer. That's not a new idea, right? I mean, Brendan Page founded Google around the idea of the Star Trek computer. But here we are with generative AI everywhere, and yet it seems like, especially in the large enterprise, not that much has really changed because it's hard to adopt these things. And I'm sure you've all seen the many articles about how, we're in the trough of disillusionment, and GAI is not going to pay off, billions of dollars in data centers, and what results to show. I don't think that's the case. I think everybody realized as early as GPT-3 that this is going to be transformative, but transformation takes time and it's very hard to predict it. Anyway, what happened right around the time GPT-3 came out was I was working on a project to put together 3 Elastic searches, a Postgres database, and a Solr index. And after getting 2 done and struggling on the third, I said, there's got to be a better way. And so I wrote an open sourced a product called Swirl Meta Search. Swirl is a classic meta search engine. The idea is it takes the user's query and sends it out to various endpoints, search engines, databases, whatever can respond, and then re-ranks the results. Now, in the old days, that was a bad idea. Many meta search engines died if they weren't built by publishers because just getting to some endpoint is hard enough. If you needed network changes and things like that, then ultimately re-ranking, how are you ever going to compare a little matching snippet from an email message or a long section that matches from an article or a project management comment or a chat comment? How do you put those together? Well, actually,
Sid, excuse me, Sid, are you sharing a presentation?
I'm not sharing just yet.
Okay.
I figured I'd talk to it for a second.
Okay, thank you.
No, we'll put some pictures up. But ultimately, I realized if the world had really moved to cloud, and that turned out to be true, right? All those indices and systems I was trying to connect were basically on the internet with a standards-based authentication mechanism. So I could query them all and then re-rank the results using a large language model. And that ultimately is what the first version of Swirl is. And today, well, we've learned a lot and come a long way. So let me show you some thoughts, share some thoughts on that, and we can see what you guys think. So hopefully you are seeing my screen.
We are.
Okay, awesome. So ultimately, what Swirl is doing these days is we use meta search in the enterprise to have a secure conversation with internal data. That's what I think the promise of AI hints at. Hard to do, but it's actually totally doable because it all starts with search. If your employees can't find information, how is the generative AI going to find it? Copying and pasting is impractical. Cloud services are frequently blocked in the large enterprise. And over the last year, since the release of GPT-4, which I think really blew people's minds and opened the door of possibilities, let's say, very open, the large enterprise didn't go stampeding into those services. Instead, they said, look, we need this on premises. We need this in our cloud. We can't just start copying petabytes of expensive, carefully managed data the stewards are not going to allow us to put it into some third party or some other new vector database. And is that really necessary anyway? Well, I'm here to say it's not. The trick is to apply search to the problem, not the database model of data in, insight out. Because what if you have too much data? Swirl securely connects your enterprise generative AIs, a long list of them, including OpenAI, etc., Claude, Anthropic, Cohere, Gemini, Bedrock, to those internal sources, the ones that have the answers that we want. And that's what enables ultimately a conversation with the data. Now, what does that look like? Let's take a look at that. That's what I wanted to spend more time on. A conversation with your data, first of all, it's omni-channel. I'm going to show you a user interface that comes with Swirl called Galaxy Chat, but you don't have to use it. You could use Microsoft Teams to talk to the bot. You could have your own UI. Why not use WhatsApp or iMessage if that's your preference, right? I think the whole point of Swirl is an API engine, and you can have an omni-channel conversation with your data using Swirl. I started out actually having a real conversation. It's an example I have used before, but it's completely different when you take it as a conversation. I needed to know how much cyber insurance Swirl has as a company. It's a very standard question. And you know that feeling you get when you're the one who's responsible, but you don't quite know the answer? I had that feeling because I knew I bought the policy and I didn't remember. I dropped it in my OneDrive, as one does. So I went to Swirl and said, look, I'm trying to find information about this. It said, well, do you mean Swirl or do you mean cyber insurance in general? I said, no, I want Swirl's policy. It's very literal, our assistant here. Then it suggested in that case that I might look through Outlook and OneDrive as a good source for it. And it suggested search terms. I said, yeah, try OneDrive. And in a total time of less than 1 minute, I got the answer. Right here, this is a RAG from my OneDrive, from the policy, and actually 2 PDFs, which collectively create the policy and the explanation of coverage. It summarized what's included, how much, $1 million. It even went into detail about the limitations, since I had expressed interest in the coverage amount. It summarizes it and gives me links to review the documents so that I don't have to trust it. Now, those documents collectively are about 70 pages of PDF. And that would take me, I did it by hand. It takes 7 to 8 minutes to do that by hand. And that's kind of knowing what I'm looking for, right? If it was an unfamiliar PDF that I'd never seen before, it might take a little bit longer. So it's a huge savings. Now, the conversation doesn't have to end here. I can continue on about the policy's effective date. And again, I get the answer in just seconds. I can ask it to summarize, so I can forward that to our controller, who's very interested in these kinds of things and making sure that we're compliant about it. I actually went on to have a lengthy conversation about our lease. We have a lease from, for our office space, and it requires us, I remembered, to have a particular level of insurance. So I went on and on about that. Ultimately, that's the point of a conversation. It's a real business process that business people, all of us, developers, business people, analysts, investors, talent scouts, everyone lives in that world at least to some degree. There are interruptions. You need to provide information. You need to answer a question. You need to remove some barrier. You need to compare 2 things. That's the power of AI. It's a productivity tool. And here's some more concrete examples, right, from my small company, to summarizing the new therapies for solid tumors across multiple sources, including arXiv, PubMed, and the web. Or answering questions from complex documents. Here's a 49-page PDF about a grease gun that you don't really want to read all of. It's laid out in a very, let's say, strongly engineering-oriented approach. You can see the table below, right, with the 12,000 hours is actually a column. But the correctly directed, right, with the right RAG, Swirl can answer questions like, what's the maintenance time required? Even though it's trapped in a complicated table, Swirl can help the LLM understand it regardless. One thing I should mention, Swirl operates on full text, fetches those. It can also operate on highly structured data, such as from Snowflake, ThoughtSpot. Here are examples, actually, from Google BigQuery, where Swirl is rendering charts. In this case, just some simple examples of funding. We have a funding database loaded in BigQuery. You can see some of the examples and how much they raised, what categories they're in. and how much they raise by round. Because in the real world, structured and unstructured data is important. You can even get ready for your webinar, and I wanted to see and check. I wouldn't want to make a mistake if I ended up having to introduce Paul, but at the same time, notice that it pulled in something from our SharePoint, which is the fact that actually we're a exhibitor at that upcoming Generative AI World 2024. Woot! So there, I remember Adam signed us up for that, right? So we're very excited about that, but that's the kind of insight that you'd like to be able to get as part of a conversation. So what is Swirl exactly? First of all, it's AI infrastructure software. You bring your own generative AI LLMs. We plug into most of them. We plug into a huge range of different repositories. I'll share the list at the end. Swirl is a real-time scalable architecture that requires no bulk transferring of data. There is no indexing, no ACLs to aggregate or keep up to date. Because Swirl is always searching on behalf of a user, the insights it creates are personal. Meaning when I'm asking questions in the conversation and I get RAG results, those are from the view that I have of the data sprawl here at Swirl. So my Outlook, my OneDrive, and the shared ones as well, and my tickets and all of the other things that are unique to me. Most importantly, again, it's omni-channel. You can have it your way. It doesn't have to be a UI like ours. It can be built into an existing application or some existing infrastructure. Architecturally, there are two parts to it. The Swirl Copilot, Swirl's Copilot turns any sufficiently capable LLM into that chatbot, educates it on what the user knows and what they understand, and ultimately they become a helpful guide, or I should say it becomes a helpful guide, to get you to the right set of search terms and sources. When you have an agreed upon search, then the Swirl AI Connect, that's the meta search part, grabs those credentials, runs that search, re-ranks the results and RAGs, and re-injects that into the conversation. Swirl maintains the context, so the bot can remember what you say, can summarize, opine, help you drill in, whatever it takes. How does Swirl do the re-ranking, you might be wondering? Swirl uses a reader LLM. I don't know if this is a familiar term or not. I just paused to see if anybody had heard or hadn't heard. I'd be happy to explain. It's really the middle layers of the output of a set of deep learners that would be turned into a generative AI, but without the generative parts. It exposes methods like similarity, nearest neighbor, clusters. So it's analyzing text very precisely, but it isn't ever changing the text. And so with the Reader LLM, you can actually get a great example of this. If you go to Google right now and you search for Red Hat acquires, the first bunch of results are all about Red Hat being acquired by IBM, limitations of the paid search model. If you run that same search using Swirl, which has a Google programmable search engine, we even ship the keys. So if you just run it off the open source version, you can run the search in 1 second. If you run the same search, you'll get back results 7, 8, and 9 from Google, which are about Red Hat acquiring companies, even buying a company, as you can see from result 4, because the LLM, the Reader LLM, values word order, knows that we're not talking about acquiring Red Hat, it's the other way around, and also that buys means the same thing. Reader LLM from Swirl can actually use any set of embeddings, so it's also pluggable in that regard. So if you have your own trained models, you can bring those. And ultimately, it lets you use the AIs in the first column to generate insights from the data platforms, enterprise applications, and web services you see here. And maybe most importantly, if you don't see one here, there's a set of request gets and request post generics that you can use and just configure. Put in your URL, some parameters, credentials. We support bearer tokens, auth, and authentication through simple HTTP, various other HTTPs. And most importantly, we can plug into your SSO and do full OAuth too. So we support Ping Federate, Okta, and others so that your user can log in once and have access to everything that they're authorized to see. So I'll just pause there. I know that was a lot to digest, and I think I probably used most of that time, and love to take any questions to discuss more about it. And I hope you found that interesting.
Wonderful, Sid. Who's got questions for Sid?
Yeah, I'm curious as to how this compares to an enterprise searches like Glean, and what are the advantages of Swirl?
Awesome question. So my understanding is, and I can only tell you what I've read about Glean. I have not used it. but they are building a model, a GAI model from your data. So they necessarily make a copy of it, and it is hosted in their environment. I believe they're a SaaS company. Swirl is infrastructure software you deploy in your own environment, anywhere you can run a Docker, and I run it on a laptop. You can run it on a bigger box. So your data and your AI and the commentary and insight never leave your perimeter. I'm not exactly sure what the word to call it is nowadays, right? It's your private cloud. Everybody has 3 clouds. So the idea is that it's on-prem, it's under your control, and it's not something that we host. We do host, but really not for sensitive applications like that. And we are used somewhat in air-gapped environments, by the way, for defense applications, if that's of interest. That's a reason that we do that.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Sid, I had struggled with the same thing behind the firewall. Trust boundaries, a term I heard the other day, which kind of made sense, kind of gets over that. But
Oh, I like that.
next, who other questions for so Sid, what's
Yeah,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was looking at your list of AI and LLMs. I don't see Meta here.
Olama. That's that. We can add more. We actually support quite a few more than this, but we try to keep the list short. One thing about Swirl Enterprise is if if you need a connector that ChatGPT has heard of, we will generate it for you and ship it to you and then maintain it. So we do provide additional connectors on demand for any known system.
Great. Thank you. Hey, go ahead, Van. Thanks for raising your hand.
Thanks for question.
Yeah, I said, thanks for this great information. Looks like a great tool. I was trying to follow how, well, I don't think you actually said it. So the question is, what do you have to do to set up the connection to your OneDrive, the connection to whatever Gen AI tools so that it knows where to find things?
All right, awesome question. Thank you. So we use a no-code model. So for example, to connect to a source like M365, I'm going to take that one first. You actually have to do an app registration to connect your Swirl instance to your M365 tenant. There's a document on our website, docs.swirl.today, which describes exactly, it's the standard process that Microsoft requires for everyone. Once you have the secret and the ID, you plug those into a search provider record, or an authenticator if you're using the Enterprise Edition, and restart Swirl. Now you have that IDP available. You have the OAuth 2 connection available to those. Similarly, for an AI, let's say you want to use OpenAI or Anthropic, you go in, there's a thing called an AI provider record. We ship 20, 30 of them preloaded. So you would go in, you would take the, say, Claude, you'd make that active, you'd put your API key in, you can add additional parameters, like if you have a project code or an organ ID. It varies some from AI provider to AI provider. Again, save it, restart Swirl. Now you have that AI provider active. You can actually assign different roles to different AIs. So Swirl supports different GAIs for query rewriting, direct answers, RAG, and chat. Also separate embeddings models.
So could you create a chat bot basically within, using RAG within OpenAI's tools and connect directly to that? So say you had, 50 documents that you were all about some kind of medical history that you wanted to maintain and wanted to be able to search. You could connect just that specific RAG tool to it as well.
Well, sure. So the only thing I can say is that Swirl doesn't have a place to index documents, but assuming that you had those 50 documents indexed somewhere, like in OneDrive, then yes, absolutely. You can use Swirl to RAG right off those with your choice of AI, including
indexed in a RAG tool. You could still get to them via that RAG tool.
Anything that has an API, right? So if it accepts a request post or a request get, you can configure Swirl to talk to it. As long as it provides JSON or XML response, we can parse it and then re-rank the results. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so.
Good. Thanks, man. Go ahead, JC.
Yeah, hi, Sid. Thanks for the demo. That was great. The question that I have is, can you go into more details into how you manage who gets access to what information throughout the enterprise, knowing that execs, will have access to certain amounts and others to, lesser amounts? I'm just curious how that's architected.
So this is live, the Swirl that I use all the time, our internal one. And here, the key is this. this little button right here means that I'm logged in to our single sign-on. We use Microsoft as our identity provider, but
Okay.
that's the most important thing about Swirl. You can't put documents in, but you can put keys in. Authentication keys, bearer tokens, or OAuth tokens, or single sign-on tokens. So in the large enterprise, it's very typical to have some product like Okta or Ping Federate, or they often have custom authentication flows with systems called CAS. Anyway, ultimately, we have another abstraction called an authenticator. It's like an AI provider or a search provider, which is the record that you modify when you want to, add a new connection. Similarly, you can just write an authenticator. It's just a set of codes and things like that, and URLs that you put in and secrets that logs the user in. So then when Swirl wants to do a RAG, it's searching on behalf of that user with that user's tokens. And so it sees exactly what that user sees, but only what they see. And the main reason that you might have pause, let's say taking two data sources that have ACLs, maybe they even have complex security, like each user sees different rows and columns or different records or whatever it is. If you just take those data, all the data out of those two systems and drop them into a new vector database, you might very well be intermingling the data inappropriately. That's not a FUD thing. That's true long before vector databases came around, right? Like that could be the case in the database too. If you have ACLs and you don't merge the ACLs correctly, you have exposed the data. But Swirl doesn't ever do that. It only uses existing entitlements, and it only ever follows the approved, right, security system. So if you're not logged into Swirl, you can't search anything. If you're logged in as you at work, and you'll only ever see what you're authorized to see.
Okay.
That's a great question, though. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead, Tim. Tim Andrews, are you on mute, Tim?
Yes, I'm on mute and I'm traveling and I pressed the wrong button and all those kind of things. So can you hear me now?
Well,
Yes.
you're proving you're not AI then, I guess.
Yeah. That's one way to prove it. Fumbling incompetence. So I'm just trying to make sure I'm tracking because you've been using the term RAG. And I guess when I hear the term RAG, I think of a set of vector databases that are queried and then passed off ultimately to the LLM. It doesn't sound like you're using it that way. So I'm just trying to clarify that I'm tracking right. And when you said, oh, well, if it's indexed by OneDrive, then we can find it. But OneDrive isn't creating embeddings. It's not creating a vector database. It's just the normal OneDrive index. Am I understanding that right?
Correct. And what Swirl does after the initial search period is we take the top results, the most relevant ones as determined by the LLM. And when you go in RAG, which I can do by hitting this generate AI response button here, where we kind of a two-part model. Here you can see I ran a search, and here are my traditional search results. Very traditional. This is post re-ranking. Now, by the way, one thing Swirl lets you do is you can use the shopping cart. If you decide for whatever reason you don't want one of these items in, you can uncheck it. So say I don't like whatever, for whatever reason, I know I don't want this page in there, right? As sometimes the analyst does. So I can now update it. And now I'm generating a result without that one in it. But now Swirl is fetching the full text of the documents. Swirl actually can extract the text from 1,500 different file formats. Swirl is understanding the tables and creating embeddings on its own using the Reader LLM. We only embed the relevant portions of the document. The Reader LLM is able to very swiftly scan the full text and identify the relevant passages. Those are then turned into vectors on the fly in real time in memory, and the analysis of ultimately the RAG is then done, or the text data, I should say, from the RAG chunks are then passed to the generative AI for summarization, question answering, etc., and the text result is passed back. So we minimize the amount of the number of vectors created using search techniques.
Got it. And what happens to those vectors after this query session has ended? Are they just thrown away and then regenerated the next time, or do you save them?
They can be cached. That's an option. So, for example, if people are in the same document, you don't want to keep fetching and reprocessing that document.
Right. So, but when you say cache, I guess I always think of caches as ephemeral. So are these permanent caches, or are
Oh,
these
no.
caches that go away?
I love, yes, it's ephemeral. Actually, you can do all kinds of interesting things with Swirl to configure it to not store data. So that's I think the best way to protect the data. So you can actually have it that certain providers are only, oh, there we go, live without a net. So we got a timeout from OpenAI. Only stored in memory ever and never persisted to disk. In addition, you can have data that is expired over time. So for example, if a result isn't fetched, it could be expired automatically. And again, most importantly, the Swirl database is under your control, not ours.
Yeah. Okay. And then so if I actually wanted to save it permanently, is that an option?
Absolutely.
Okay,
No reason
I
you
see.
couldn't.
So you're creating embeddings on the fly, and your reader LLM is fast enough that it's not introducing significant latency. Is
That's
that
right.
a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay. And then you can decide whether you want to keep the results of that embedding or not in a separate set of decisions.
Absolutely right. It
Okay,
ultimately comes
great.
down to the stewardship of it. That's a great question. Thank you.
That's great. Good. Thanks, Tim. Go ahead, Lucinda.
Yeah, thanks. This is fascinating, and I really want to try it out. Let's see. So one of the questions I've been kind of thinking about is actually there was an article today, Paul, that Paul had in his news group, where they were talking about how to get the right answer for if you have a lot of, like, how do you know you have the right answer in a RAG or even this type of search? So for example, if I have an internal documents and I want to see, okay, well, we just added Juneteenth. What are all the holidays for the client, for the company? But something just recently changed. Is it good, or how does it distinguish the most recent answer from maybe something that needs to be more comprehensive, et cetera? I mean, that's a kind of an issue. That in the article that I read, it said you have to have these golden records of of no conflicting data and no duplicate data. Well, we all know that how hard that's going to be, right? So just how do you address that problem of getting the most relevant thing, or for contracts even? What's our latest way, or what is the best way of handling this sort of contract situation?
Man, that is really a great question, right? There is a tremendous concern about hallucination, but you just pointed out the vastly bigger problem that we're all much more aware of, and that is incorrect, misleading, outdated, duplicated, and flat out erroneous data is spread across the enterprise as a natural part of the data sprawl. There is no defense to that, and I would look forward to seeing a successful fine-tuning model that somehow comes around and figures out how to avoid that problem. Generative AIs are terrible at understanding time. They are not good at time at all. They are saying that GPT-5, at least one of the many rumors that I've read, I'm sure you all have too, is that's where they're going to make improvements. Here's my real answer for the next year, right? Here's what I think that makes the difference. First of all, citations. Prompt engineering needs to require the system to produce citations. The citations must be linked. There should not be a piece of data reported without a citation. If there is, that's bad. And users for a while have to click those links and verify the results for themselves. That's ultimately the cost of the benefit that we will get for the productivity increase. We have to use the citations. Second, prompt engineering has to do two things. One, provide useful context, like who the user is, what company they work for, what location they might be, perhaps something about their role, so it could answer a question about the vacation policy, as one example, and also what the date is. And then you can have, in addition, right, then bring the search technologies to bear. So a good example is semantic deduplication. LLMs are amazingly good at that. Date sort plus semantic deduplication is a very effective way to get the latest version of a document. It doesn't guarantee success, but it increases the odds. Combined with citations and insisting that the LLM call out ambiguity across entities, collectively seems to produce a system that, at least when evaluated by another LLM, isn't doing too badly. Probably better than the average employee, or probably not as good as the average employee. That was terrible, totally backwards. But as an aid, as an assistant, as a co-pilot, that success rate will get higher and higher, and it still provides huge benefit. A lot of it also is the choice of use case, right? So not every LLM and not every vector database or whatever other type of solution you might try, right? Vector databases are good at single source of things. Not every one of them is going to produce great results on every type of data. So a lot of it is identifying, which approaches work with which underlying systems. The only point I'll make, already have a lot of systems. If you have Elastic, BigQuery, or Solr, or Mongo, these all have superb vector embedding support. So rather than thinking, hey, what's the new thing? Just wait. Those are going to get so much better over time. Just upgrading is going to improve everything.
Great,
Anyways.
really good. Tim, go ahead. Tim's back on deck. Tim, do you have
I
something?
think it's just that I haven't been able to figure out how to lower my hand on my phone, so sorry.
Well, Sid, one question I had, and I apologize, I'm multitasking a little bit. You may have said it here. So do you connect to the role-based access control in existing companies, correct? Is that what I heard?
Exactly. Single sign-on, CAS, role-based, whatever's there.
So if I have a set of policies around, I want to make sure that employees in my customer service aren't using my Swirl to do personal things or doing bad words, is that at the kind of LLM pipeline application level, or is that at your search level?
You could do either, and I think so. For one thing that people are you doing with Swirl is using it for removing and detecting PHI.
Yeah.
And PII before it goes into RAG, right? Since we search and fetch, that's a very natural thing for us to do. However, I believe most of the content restrictions are being set up at the LLM level, right? Especially the like inappropriate topics and stuff like that. The LLM is very likely to reject those.
Yeah.
So in that case, right, we're sort of in the position of passing on the message, if you will.
I've heard a few vendors talk about, and a couple limitations talk about having a LLM broker or choke point where every single call goes through that for all the role-based access control. Is yours similarly positioned, right? I mean, every access that employees doing is still going through your system,
Correct.
right?
That's certainly one option. Swirl Copilot, right? All of the messages are routed through Swirl. We maintain the context and we are storing all that data for a variety of purposes, right? To improve the experience. So that's true. Part of the design of Swirl is that we don't interfere. You can deploy Swirl as an elastic Kubernetes cluster. I don't mean Elasticsearch. I mean elastically self-scaling Kubernetes cluster, and the requests are all stateless, right? So we can use a very simple model to scale and handle those additional requests. And frankly, when you're just chatting, we hardly impose any overhead, right? We're just storing for the most part. Pretty much doing what the ChatGPT front end, whatever that is doing, right? Between sending back and forth the request posts that presumably are going back to some back end there.
Sid, fantastic. Thank you so much for really sharing a very precise demonstration. So thank you.